Hello, my name is Alexis Strader, and I will be talking about the main themes of the class text, Chapter 5, Women in Contra-Revolutionary War, the article, Women's Military Roles Cross-Nationally, and the documentary, To Live with Terror. The main themes of the class text talk about the women during the Contra-Revolutionary War and their hardships that they went through against the FSLN and the Sandinista and the government, of course. So they faced many hardships throughout the war, like the mistreatment and because of like gender and race, and race becomes a very big topic during the class text because of the indigenous people and their way of life, because the FSLN and the Sandinistas don't necessarily agree with how they're living and like what their views are, their traditions, because it's different than theirs. The war's fought because of this reason, because they don't agree with how their traditions are, and a lot of it becomes about land and all of like the crops and stuff that they have, but they don't necessarily get to keep all of these things because of the just everybody else wants the crops and stuff. So the main objectives of this are authoritarian regimes where the government and the Sandinistas want to change like the way of life in the indigenous people of the Atlantic coast, and they kind of like try to control them with this, because they obviously war, everybody doesn't always agree with that. So another one of the main objectives was patriarchy, where women had to face a lot of hardships because of their gender, and it was really difficult for them to get jobs during this time. And although many other women in different areas of the country had already like moved past some of these issues, it was really difficult for the indigenous people because of their race as well, which I will get to in just a minute. But the women just weren't able to really like fight. There was much more women doing the FSLN, and which was the opposite of the Contra women during this time, and they just didn't have much of an opportunity because of their gender, because they were women and they weren't supposed to be fighting. They weren't really supposed to have any jobs or anything like that. It's just, you know. And then another one of the main themes was racism, because of the indigenous people and their traditions and their way of life were different, and not everybody agreed with that, because everybody's supposed to have the same goals and the same traditions, and it's just not right if everybody has different ones, which obviously, as we know today, that is very wrong, and racism should not be a thing. So the main themes of the article focus on women's military roles throughout different cultures and different like countries and stuff. And this was not like a normal thing, although it was becoming more common a little bit like at this time. And so that's a main theme, but it's not the main theme of the article. The main theme of the article focuses on the relationship between the culture and the need for security, which women could help with during this time, because they already had all of the men that they needed. And so for women to participate in this was desperately needed during this time. But because of the cultural values, they weren't it was really difficult for women to be able to join wars and to like separate from their cultural values, because women were supposed to be moms and housewives and do all of the domestic figures that women are supposed to do during this time, like the main things that women usually do. But because of the need for security, that kind of overpowered the cultural values, because it was much more extensive and women were needed for war. And so it talks about kind of like the differing, how those two values collided. And yeah, so the main objectives of this, well, I guess one really main objective was just patriarchy, because women had to face the decision between joining a war for the need for security or separating from their values, which they've always been used to in their culture. The main themes of the documentary focus on these terrorist attacks that had occurred in Argentina. And there was this one in particular, this attack that had taken place in particular, that was a bomb by, used by terrorists, and these terrorists were targeting Jews in particular. And this was not the only attack. There was multiple attacks. There was one 2 years before this that had occurred that was, again, targeting Jews mostly. And this kind of follows along into World War II and through all of that era. And so, as we can see, Jews are like the main target during this time. And this is when Hitler was in power and Nazis came to be, where they would target Jews, as I said. And but during this time, we can see that all of the people of Argentina come together and fight for what is happening, because the president isn't really doing anything about these attacks, and nobody else who is higher up in power is really doing anything. So the people who were lost, their families, are the ones who had to come together and fight for their family. So yeah. And the main objectives of this were mostly racism, because, as we can see, Jews are the targets during this time, and just because of their race and because people didn't agree with it, as per usual. That's how racism works. And yeah, so Jews were like the main targets. Another objective that could be considered is authoritarian regimes, where it focuses around Hitler and like his power over all of these people, and his control, his need to control all of these people, where he chooses certain people to like work under him, and he wants to demolish all of the Jew race, and that could be considered authoritarian regimes. So